Welcome to the second workshop of our Datathon machine learning competition. We had the first workshop last week where we gave you a general introduction. This week will be about the annotation process, manual annotation that is very crucial for AI models that we're going to develop. And then next Sunday, we will talk about the process how to use data sets to identify with some language models automatically anti-Semitic content in a larger data set. And that workshop will be run by my colleague and friend Damir Chava, who is a professor here in linguistics. And the workshop today we will do with my colleague Katharina Sommer. And we have on our agenda, it will be probably a little bit shorter than last week. So we go over what is annotation and why is that important? Why do we do this? How do we do this? And how to do this also in the in this Datathon part. What is the data? What are definitions then? So we are talking about identifying anti-Semitic messages. So what kind of definition do we use? What kind of standard definition? And we'll give you some examples about that. And then the annotation tool that we use. So we developed an annotation tool that makes it easier to label the data sets. We'll also talk about annotators, and then we have some time for Q&A. And I will hand over now to Katharina, who will explain why is it really crucial to annotate, also manually annotate. And hopefully at the end of this workshop, you know more about it and also have some ideas how to compete in this Datathon part. So as a reminder, this Datathon and machine learning competition has two parts, the competition. One is the annotation and the other one is the applying AI models. With that, I hand over to Katharina.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me well. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Datathon participants, but also to the part of the audience that is not participating in the Datathon. As Günther said, I'll start by just explaining what is annotation. Well, we're starting with Günther, are you changing these slides currently?
Oh, sorry. I won't touch the screen now.
Okay, so I'll get back to the first slide that I wanted to talk about today. Let's see if I can get there on my own. Yes, that is it. So what is annotation? I looked at Wikipedia for answering this question. It says text annotation is the practice and the result of adding a note or gloss to a text, which may include highlights or underlining, comments, footnotes, tags, and links. So the first thing we learn is that annotation is the process as well as the outcome of labeling data. So when we talk about annotation, we're probably also going to use the word labeling and sometimes classifying. During the course of this presentation, you're going to understand better why we sometimes use those words, but how they are not always the same. So we're talking about labeling data. In our case, that is language data. So that is tweets, things that are written, and we want to label them. And so the question is, can I change the slide as one question? I'll try again. Yes. The other question I wanted to answer is, why do we annotate? So we label data, and from our research perspective, so us that we want to understand online anti-Semitism, we actually have two objectives why we annotate. One is annotation helps us to understand and monitor hate on social media. So when we want to understand how anti-Semitism appears on social media, but also if it's on the rise or if it's constant, we need to somehow label data, annotate data, And we need to, Günther, are you changing the slides again?
Yeah, I'm sorry. When I do something on the Zoom stuff, then sometimes apparently it also changes the slide. So I hope that I can not interfere with your presentation anymore.
Okay,
All right.
I'll let you know. So Günther and I, about 2 years ago, Elon Musk bought Twitter, and many actors like non-governmental organizations, institutions actually feared that with him buying Twitter, that would lead to more anti-Semitism on this platform, because he announced that he would actually have it a free speech platform. So he wouldn't have any platform policies that would somehow moderate content. So we decided to annotate data from that period of time to understand if actually Twitter or posts on Twitter got more anti-Semitic, if we could observe more anti-Semitism on Twitter. First answer, yes, we were able to observe that. But then also we annotated data to understand how that is the case. So is it actually due to platform policies? And we were able to observe that it was not only due to something that we assumed would be not censoring hate speech and just having kind of a free speech rule, but more that that was in a time when Kanye West, also known as Ye, had many anti-Semitic outbursts online and offline. And there were many people repeating his opinions online and offline. So we observed more anti-Semitism during that time, but we did not only attribute it to the fact that Elon Musk bought Twitter. So annotation helped us in this case. If you want to read the paper, you're going to learn a bit more about it. Helped us to kind of monitor what was happening on Twitter at that time. The other reason why we annotate is because annotated data sets, or we could also call them gold standard or gold standard corpora, are needed to learn whether posts are biased or not. And this is not only the case for human beings, but also for machines. So when we look into the competition of the machine learning part, you're always going to have, so machine learning has many different forms. Java is going to teach you more about it next week, but we can generally talk about supervised or unsupervised machine learning. There's also semi-supervised or reinforcement learning. There's a lot of different types of machine learning, but just to understand, supervised machine learning requires a labeled data set. In our case, that is social media posts, and we say they are yes or no anti-Semitic. Then we somehow have the machine learning part. So we train algorithms, that's how we can call it. And then we have an output that we also want to test. So this labeled data set, we can split it either in a 2-way split or a 3-way split. So we can just say we have a part of the data set that we use for training, and then we have a part of the data set where we actually test. But we could also have a 3-way split where we say part of our labeled data set of our gold standard that we use for training, then we have a validation part, and then we have a test part. But you see, somehow these labeled data are key for machines understanding anti-Semitism. And what is very important for such data, because the machine is going to learn how to detect anti-Semitism, is reliability. Reliability is a word that many of you know, but it's also a term that we use in research in order to describe that data is, or research can be reproduced. And then if we reproduce it under the same conditions, we would assume to find the same results. So it's very important that we always make sure our research is reliable, that our annotation process is reliable. And what do we actually need for a reliable annotation process? Those are 4 different factors. The first thing that we need is a data set that we can annotate. Now, if we want to make our data comparable, we somehow always need to apply the same sampling method. That means we need always to have the same approach for gathering our data in order to say things are different compared data A to data B. So in our case, that means we have data with the keyword Jews and the keyword Israel. And then we have different time spans. Usually those can be January to April, May to August, or September to December. So trimesters in a year. It can also be an entire year. And then we're gonna collect something that we call a random sample. So of course, we are not able to label all data that we find on the internet, all data that we find on a certain platform. But if we randomize our choice and our what we call sample is big enough, then there's a statistic probability that it's very likely to represent all of the data. So sampling with the same random sampling approach allows us to make our data comparable and say, well, in certain time spans, we have observed more or less anti-Semitism than in others. The data that you're seeing on the right side is all of the samples that have been annotated by our expert annotators in the research lab. And this is also for the Datathon participants, the data that you can annotate yourselves. The second thing we need is a definition. And now I hand over to Günther because he's going to explain more about this.
Yes, thank you. So if you want to have a data set that we can then train algorithms, this data set needs to be clear that one part is and consistent anti-Semitic and non-anti-Semitic, so that the training process really works. So we want a definition that is not too blurred and helps us saying, yes, that is, or that's not. And that's not trivial. I mean, last week we went over the history of anti-Semitism. There's so many stereotypes, and to identify them is often tricky. And a definition can help, but of course the knowledge about all the stereotypes is necessary to really see if a message is anti-Semitic or not. And we use a definition that is more or less becoming standard now. It's a definition that the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance came up with. In fact, they modeled it on a previous definition. And that has been adopted by many organizations, including our university, by the way, and some countries and many organizations use this definition. What is actually this definition, and how can we make it work in an annotation process? The definition was really developed to help educators, but also law enforcement officers to have on a one-page paper say, well, here are some indications to say this might be anti-Semitic or not. So it starts with a very general sentence that is maybe the core of this definition, saying anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. So that is very broad, and to give you better guidelines, or us, this organization came up with some examples that can illustrate what this can mean. And this is also what we use then to operationalize this for our annotation process. But before they give you the examples, the definition says manifestations might include the targeting of the state of Israel, conceived as a Jewish collectivity. However, criticism of Israel similar to that level against any other country cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. So that shows you already that, yeah, that is one area where it's often not so clear. Is that now anti-Semitic or not? So we need some indications. If something is related to Israel, can we just dismiss it? Oh, that has nothing to do with Jews. That is often not the case, because often then Jews are targeted directly with some rhetoric that also relates to Israel and has very classical anti-Semitic stereotypes that we know from centuries earlier. So But that is an area that is often difficult, so it's good to have some examples that can show us. And another thing is that the definition points out is contemporary examples of antisemitism in public life, the media, schools, the workplace, and the religious sphere could taken into account the overall context, and then it gives you the examples. So that means, yeah, we have to look at the general context, and that is sometimes a bit tricky on social media. We cannot really know much about the intent of the users. Often the users are anonymous, and sometimes there are bots, but still. So if we say bots that do not really have an intent, at least some of them are just taking random text, they still can have an anti-Semitic message. So yeah, we have to take the impact into account, but also the overall context, how the viewer then sees the message in it. Is it likely to that you get an anti-Semitic message out of it or not? That is at least how we go about this. And then I won't go through all the examples, but there are 12 examples or 11 examples, but one is this general hatred towards Jews that you saw in the general definition. I go over those that are highlighted because they are, at least we have seen that these categories mostly apply. So one is really straightforward hatred, then some stereotypical allegations about Jews, including this idea that Jews run the world, a Jewish power. The Holocaust denial is one thing. And then Israel-related, very often the idea that Israel should cease to exist, has no right to exist. So denying the Jewish people the right to self-determination, which is anchored even in international law, that people have the right to self-determination, and that very often is only then applied to Jews. And lastly, I will go into comparisons between the Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. And it's really more saying that these are the same than comparison. So let's go through this. So hatred is usually pretty straightforward. So somebody says, I hate Jews, and the spelling, as you see here, is sometimes users try to spell it differently. They think that this would help them to not get censored on the platform. So some really say this very openly. You have a second examples here saying, I could give you millions reasons why I hate Jews, but you can't give me one why you support them. So again, justifying hatred against Jews. And maybe I need to give you a trigger warning. So we will see more of these really vile rhetoric now on the screen that sometimes is really hurting people. So then we have these kind of stereotypical allegations, and there are so many. So that hopefully helps what we did last week on giving you some overview about all these different stereotypes that have been accumulated over the centuries that have been voiced as accusations against Jews. And it includes very prominently what is highlighted here in yellow, the myth about a world Jewish conspiracy, or of Jews controlling the media, economy, government, or other institutions. And here you see an example. Katharina brought up the example of Kanye West. This is one of his first tweets that he put out that was openly anti-Semitic. And this is by user referring to Kanye West and kind of doubling down on this, saying, now, yeah, Jews admitted they control the media. And just pushing this idea that Jews are in control. So this is one example that we would classify as anti-Semitic according to this paragraph of this ARA definition. When we go to denying the Holocaust, so some is really outright denial. Here you see a post where the user referring to Hitler says Hitler was the greatest man who ever lived, and then puts the word Holla hoax. So Holla hoax in itself, this word, if it's used affirmatively, is a denial of the Holocaust, saying Holocaust was a hoax. So that's a pretty straightforward, clear example of that. If we go then to denying the Jewish people the right to self-determination, that is often a bit more tricky to see. The definition gives an example, for example, by claiming that the existence of the state of Israel is a racist endeavor. That doesn't mean an accusation that Israel has some racist policies. That would still not be considered as anti-Semitic. But if you say, in essence, Israel is so bad, so racist, it cannot change, then this is a way of defamation, delegitimization, and leads to denying the Jewish people the right to self-determination. So you have that on the left here, a very clear example of this. Israel should not exist at all. So that that is a clear example of that. Or there was even a campaign in London with exactly that sentence. That was some years ago. Israel is a racist endeavor, and then there was a picture taken of that doubling down on this, and that was then posted. So that would be two examples of that are clear examples. Sometimes it's not as clear, and can be debate about this, but these would be clear examples. And then one other paragraph here, that the ARA definition has identified how anti-Semitism often is voiced with in relation to Israel. That means when we see that traditional in the anti-Semitic tradition, symbols and images are associated with so this classic anti-Semitism of Jews killing Jesus, or the blood libel. So the blood libel is this idea that was very prominent in the Middle Ages, that Jews would abduct Christian children or little children and use their blood for some rituals. There was never a case like this, but this was a rumor for which many Jews, entire Jewish communities even, were killed, murdered. So if we use these symbols to characterize Israel or Israelis, then this can also be seen as an example of anti-Semitism. So if you say this, one of these Middle Ages stereotypes is, yes, Jews are bloodthirsty. If you just replace it by Israel, saying Israel is bloodthirsty, well, it's a good indication that this might be anti-Semitic. Or if you say this idea, Israel is a child killer, it's not the idea that in the current war, Israel is responsible for killing children, but for murdering children explicitly. They want to murder children, so there's accusation of intent there. And then, therefore, this can also be seen as an example of anti-Semitism. And then we have on the bottom left, Israel targets children, and then it adds Israel is evil. So this demonization of Israel that we have seen with the demonization of Jews for centuries, where it said Jews are evil, and it just replaced by Israel. That would be another example that falls under this category. Good. And then lastly, we have this comparison. So with this comparison, really what is meant here is not an academic comparison where we see differences and some parallels maybe, but really saying this is equating this. So equating Nazi policy with Israeli policy. And you have that in symbols where you just combine the swastika that stands for the Nazis with the Israeli flag that you see on the left here. Or then even people saying it's worse than the Nazis. Israel is worse than the Nazis. And on the right here, you have it's a comment on a story about a Holocaust survivor. So that says this Holocaust survivor witnessed the worst of humankind in the Nazis. And the comment then is, one of the worst, Israel is worse. So referring to probably what's happening now. It's a very recent post saying the war in Gaza is even worse than the Holocaust. That would be something, if we go into an academic comparison, really, that would be very quickly, we could see that, yes, there's a lot of suffering in Gaza, and that we see can also point to some responsibility, of course, from the Israeli government, but there's nothing compares, this doesn't compare really to targeting worldwide all Jews and putting them into death camps and killing 6 million Jews. So this is just, if you look at it for a minute with an honest comparison, then you would see that there is the difference. But here is this, it is used really as a defamation to say Israel is really bad. And that would be another example. That's probably then anti-Semitic. And with that, I hand over back to Katharina, who explains now the annotation tool that those who participate in the competition will use to do the annotation, to compete in this part of the competition.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see. There it is, new slide, great. So the annotation tool, before I actually explain what the annotation tool is, I want to give a general remark on why we want to use an annotation tool. So I'm trying to change the slides. Günther, are you changing the slides currently?
Well, I tried to put the link in the chat, and while I do this, it changes the slides. So maybe I just put this link in the chat briefly, and then you can go.
Okay.
Okay.
Doing that, I'll just one remark on the slide we're currently looking at. That is, why should we use an annotation tool? Günther and I, together with our dear former colleague Samir Karali, wrote a paper and did an experiment on how using annotation tools is actually more efficient for both annotators and data analysts. I'm trying to get back to the slide so you can just, if you're interested in it, see the title. Okay, it's not working. The paper is called, well, you're gonna find it. It's also in the Journal of Computational Social Science. And so we had it tested, that it's easier to handle, it's more efficient, and also it makes kind of the annotation, it gives it a better overview, which you're gonna understand, because now I'm gonna show you on how we actually, when we say annotate, what we actually do. So as I said, the annotation tool that we developed, the basic annotation tool was this one. Trying to get back to the slide before.
Yeah, so I did my did it in the chat. So you see here 2 links. One link is to the new portal. That's the annotation.awesome.iu.edu portal that we developed. That's a new one that everybody can use to even put up their own data sets and then build an annotation team and use it. And the other one is really designed now for this competition. And that's what we're going to use and what you're going to see on the screen. That starts with Datathon.annotation portal.com. Thanks.
So yeah, that's the first annotation tool that was developed really for our project of annotating tweets that are potentially anti-Semitic. And as Günther said, the new annotation tool was developed together with the Observatory on Social Media, which is abbreviated with AWESOME. It's still changing the slides every now and then.
Yeah, because I give now everybody the option to give comments in the chat. So
okay.
Now I'm done with that.
Okay. Just getting back, so you see the link, as Günther said, you are now able to create your own projects, which can also be interesting for people that want to annotate social media content that is not related to anti-Semitism or is related to other things than just anti-Semitism. And you're also able to annotate not only Twitter or X data, but also TikTok data, annotate images, and also just text files. So if you want, you can also look at it. And now I want to get into the annotation scheme that we always use. So in the beginning, I said that sometimes we use the word annotation, sometimes we talk about labeling, and sometimes we talk about classification. And while classification is actually a question that puts kind of things in different classes and helps to distinguish, a very simple classification could be just yes and no, or true and false. Annotation kind of gives more information to input. So the first two questions that we ask about social media content, in our case about tweets, is if they still exist, so are they still online, which is important because we can only label things that we see online. We cannot label them if they're not online. And then can read is actually the question if it's in the correct language. So looking at the Datathon participants, those two questions have nothing to do with anti-Semitism. They are just very formal about if you're actually able to read the tweet because it's still online and it's in the correct language. The next set of questions is core to our own understanding of anti-Semitism. So as you can see, the anti-Semitism rating that you can give on the right-hand side, it says according to IRA, which can be found here. So you're going to use the IRA definition that Günther just presented, and that you can also find in more detail in a document that we're going to provide to you. For everyone who's interested, we put that document on the Datathon website. So whoever wants to read into how we made one short document of the IRA definition to actually a several pages document of an own understanding of the IRA definition, you can look at the Datathon website, it's linked there. And so the anti-Semitism rating, that's a 5-point scale. If it's confident or probably not anti-Semitic, or probably or confident anti-Semitic, following the IRA definition. And there are cases where annotators, even expert annotators, are going to say, I don't know, because it's just, for example, when there's a bot that just puts together words, but some of the words are anti-Semitic, but we can't really tell there's an anti-Semitic and a non-anti-Semitic understanding. This might be one of the few cases where you choose, I don't know, but our general assumption is that experts and also lay persons at a certain point are able to identify online anti-Semitism. Now, since we say the anti-Semitism rating is according to the IRA definition, it is important that whenever you label something as anti-Semitic, you actually give the paragraph of the IRA definition that kind of makes the content anti-Semitic. So sometimes several paragraphs may apply, then you can choose the strongest one. You can see we have the 12 paragraphs. And of course, if it's not anti-Semitic, you're going to choose none because you have to give an answer to this. If it is anti-Semitic because of several paragraphs of the IRA definition, there's always a comment section. So that is also interesting for us, since we don't only do a quantitative but also a qualitative analysis, looking into the comment section. And this is maybe interesting for all of the people in the audience that work with annotation, always helps identifying interesting cases. What is important is also that the IRA definition is a definition that just contains 12 paragraphs. Anti-Semitism has a century-long history. So what we established is the disagree with IRA button. What does that mean? So the IRA definition may not cover all types of anti-Semitism, but there is more anti-Semitism that is not covered by the IRA. Therefore, if a tweet is anti-Semitic, because it contains anti-Semitic tropes, but those are not explicitly named in the IRA definition. What we're going to do is we're going to choose the anti-Semitism rating that it's probably not anti-Semitic following the IRA definition, because following our interpretation of the IRA definition, it isn't anti-Semitic, but then annotators can choose the disagree with IRA button that kind of allows them to give an own or put their own understanding into the annotation process. It could also be vice versa, that annotators say, well, according to IRA, it is anti-Semitic, but I disagree with it because I personally, from my expertise, wouldn't say that is anti-Semitic. Empirically, it has shown that in our project, when people click the disagree with IRA button, in almost all cases, or the vast majority of cases, this is because a case of anti-Semitism is not covered by the IRA definition. The content type is interesting. When we look at Twitter, we could see that it is a text-based medium, but anti-Semitic content can not only be transported in a text, so something that is written, it can also be in a picture or a meme. So there can be a tweet where you can read something, it has a text, but it's not anti-Semitic, but then there's an anti-Semitic picture, as Günther showed earlier, the flag of Israel that contains a swastika. That would be an example for an anti-Semitic picture. So this would be a case where you would choose picture or meme as a content type. When a tweet links to a website that is anti-Semitic or to a YouTube video that contains anti-Semitic content, you would choose attachment, and again, linking to the comment section. If there's another content type, of course, that would be written in the additional comments. Sentiment rating is something that is also hard to identify. What we mean in our case is a sentiment rating, not how's the general sentiment of the post, but more what is the sentiment towards Judaism or Jews or Israel. So it's not identifying the sentiment of the language that is written, but a really targeted sentiment rating towards, as I said, Judaism, Jews, and Israel. One of our core pieces in the annotation is the question if a tweet is calling out anti-Semitism. As Günther already mentioned with the Holohawks example, there can be affirmative ways of using it, but there can also be critical ways of using it. We have, over the course of a long time, identified an own interpretation when something is calling out anti-Semitism, because we have identified that often when anti-Semitism is being called out, it refers to the Holocaust. So we notice that when people reported on anti-Semitism or remembered victims of anti-Semitism, that was often anti-Semitism of the past. But for the Datathon participants, you can just choose calling out if you see that a tweet is either reporting on anti-Semitism or talking critically about anti-Semitic tropes. Why is this question so central? Over the course of the Datathon, you're going to learn that anti-Semitic tropes, from a language perspective, can be very similar to people calling out anti-Semitism. So just with the example of Holohawks, there can be a tweet that uses the anti-Semitic term Holohawks in a very affirmative way, and it's going to be anti-Semitic. But then there can also be a tweet that uses the word Holohawks, but uses it in a critical way to say, this is a problem, people believe in it, people deny the Holocaust. For machines, it's very hard to tell apart when something is affirmative and when something is critical. So this is kind of an annotation that is very central to understanding how machines understand content. Denying the Holocaust is something that we have added over the course of the years. So this annotation project has been ongoing for years. And with the years, we learned and observed and saw more. So after a while, we identified that denying anti-Semitism, so denying a reasonable accusation of anti-Semitism, is something that we observed very often, but that is also something that does not necessarily or is not necessarily covered by the IRA definition. This is why we have an extra question on it. Then there's Holocaust. This question actually means related to the Holocaust. So if a tweet is related to the Holocaust, that can include imagery and comparisons to contemporary issues. So this question can apply for anti-Semitic tweets. So for example, if somebody uses the term Holocaust in an affirmative, Holohawks in an affirmative way, this is going to be related to the Holocaust and anti-Semitic. But if somebody uses the term Holocaust in a critical way, it's not going to be anti-Semitic, but still is going to be related to the Holocaust. We've also added the button of Holocaust distortion. So if a tweet uses imagery and language associated with the Holocaust for political, ideological, or commercial purposes unrelated to this history, then we would apply Holocaust distortion. And sarcasm is also an item that is very hard to identify for machines. So maybe now, after seeing all of those items, you can understand more why it's not just a mere classification process if a tweet is anti-Semitic or not, but we actually add a lot of information that we have about this tweet, a lot of understanding that we get when we look at it. And then we can also compare it to other tweets and compare those results over time.
May I just add one thing in the distortion, Katharina? So we added this because the ARA definition has only like clear case of Holocaust denial included as a form of anti-Semitism. But very often there are ways to distort the Holocaust that would not fall under the ARA definition, but that are somehow problematic. So we just want to see, okay, can we identify that later? That's the reason why we have this distortion in there.
Exactly. So this is actually leads us to the last point, that we need annotators. There is research made, but not enough actually, on the difference between expert annotators and lay annotators and what makes expert annotators actually experts. So it's defined very differently in different projects. But the annotators in the case of the Datathon are the Datathon participants, and that's also our last point for today. So you can now join us on the panel if you have questions. For the Datathon participants, you will also have the chance in our next meeting that we will just have after this session to ask more questions. But everybody that has questions on the annotation process, on our tool, on our definition, and on maybe general questions, you are invited to ask now.